why I'm here today, and let me introduce myself. So, I'm Melissa Eccles. I am the daughter of Glenda. And I am going to lower this just so audio. Um, what I'm here to present to you is coming together for racial understanding, which is your lesson for today. We're going to talk about promoting diversity and inclusion in your community through dialogue. I have the privilege of working as the coordinator for student government programs at OSU Stillwater. However, I'm also the project leader for a program called Dialogues for Change. It is a dialogue initiative on the Stillwater-based campus. However, we are a partner and a sub-initiative of the Center for Public Life here at OSU Tulsa. And so my colleagues who are the chairs of that particular center are Dr. Tammy Moore and Dr. Mike Stout, who is the author of this material that you're going to see today. And so we are just one subset of the initiatives that they have put together, and we partner across a lot of programs. We kind of initially talked about some of the passions. Diversity, equity, and inclusion work is one of my passions. And so when we started talking about this work, when my mother showed me this lesson, I started thinking, this sounds real familiar. I understand now why it sounds familiar, because my colleague wrote it. So, which is why we're here today. So on that, coming together for racial understanding is another initiative, much like mine, which is Dialogues for Change, but this is coming together for racial understanding, or better known as CTRU. And at its core, it is about bringing people together across race and ethnicity to increase the understanding about issues that are related to racism and race. So from that particular foundation, what you're going to notice is that you're going to work together for meaningful change. One of the things that we utilize is a particular dialogue format that has particular processes or stages, and we go from dialogue to change. And so that's what you're going to see in this particular process. So CTRU, or Coming Together for Racial Understanding, has 4 guiding principles. Obviously, dialogues are extremely vital to understanding, and understanding is vital to the healing and meaningful change. So a lot of what each of you all mentioned was asking questions, really kind of opening that learning space. And that's what dialogues are for. Now, as you all are members of the Cooperative Extension Service, that is well positioned to help organize and facilitate conversations in the communities that you find yourself in. You're already well situated in your community, which makes you a great avenue for dialogues. CES may also and kind of practice what we want to see valued in our communities, and what we seek to see some of that change that we're talking about. Also, you're kind of in a well-prepared situation for challenging conversations around race and racial equity and racism. You all want to be well prepared to have those conversations before engaging in the community. So obviously that's why you're here today. The CTRU program itself, we're going to kind of focus specifically on the community dialogues, and the foundational principle underneath it is a process of importance about organization and planning. Obviously, you don't want to go into a process that you know nothing about or don't have a clear understanding of. So much like any other process, dialogues take time to organize. And that's kind of what we do, and I'll give you an example for myself. And what you'll see here, there's kind of like a 4-step process. You're going to engage with your community through just simple planning efforts. Who are you going to talk to? Who's going to be involved in the dialogues? You might have to train some facilitators. We all do this voluntarily. I'm a trained facilitator myself. I also train facilitators, which is another thing that I do on the side. And so there's also the hosting facilitators through the actual dialogue process, which can also kind of depend on the length of your dialogues, depending on what type of program you're trying to do. And CTRU is well formatted for that, and so we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. But it also, the whole point of this is to see community change, whether that's policy change, whether you're wanting to just evolve the community and come more on the same page. So that's what you're looking to do. When I was driving over here, one of the things that I was thinking about, situated in this particular community that I find my mother in, one of the things that I remember her and my father always talking about, particularly in this neighborhood for years, was they wanted this particular neighborhood to have speed bumps. So something that they would probably want to talk to the community and their neighbors about would be how to go about having a dialogue with communities, and how would that look, who would they include, to be able to implement speed bumps in this particular neighborhood. That's something that you could think about for a community dialogue. Now, that obviously does not involve race and racial equity and racism, but that's the same caveat, that's the same idea around a dialogue, okay? So we're gonna focus obviously on race, racism, and racial equity. And this is what we're gonna talk about today, which is the power of meaningful dialogue. Okay, maybe, oh, there we go. Okay, so what we have here is a short video that I'm going to attempt, when I say attempt, to help us little watch here. Give me just a second. Oh, it might have actually, well, then we're just gonna go to the actual video here. Give me just a second. Sometimes I can get them to play from the PowerPoint and sometimes I can't. You just
so the first one is I am, so however you identify.
I am an Indian American.
I am
Mexican.
Pakistani American Muslim.
I am a Christian.
I am white.
I'm an American Palestinian, a student.
Sikh, Muslim,
Jewish, Arab, Kuwaiti, American,
Scottish, Irish, American.
Coptic, Orthodox, Christian, Egyptian, American.
Every week I join a conversation.
Sometimes I meet with students here at Penn State face to face.
Sometimes I video dialogue with students in the Middle East.
Last week I spoke with students from South Africa.
Next week I'm going to speak with students in Gaza.
I've met people from all over the world.
In face-to-face groups, I've met people from both extremes.
Every week I join a conversation.
I join a conversation.
I join a conversation.
Why? Why? Why?
Because I have been told that you are afraid of me.
Because I've been told that you will only see my skin color.
Because I have been told that you hate me.
I've been told that you think that we are all the same.
Because I have been told that you think I'm better than you are.
I have been told that you have power over me.
But if I'm afraid of you, I will never embrace my roots.
If I'm afraid of you, I lose your ideas.
But then you will feel empowered.
But if I'm afraid of you, then I feed into that stereotype. If I see you as the enemy, then I'm no better than you are. If I see you as the enemy,
I see you as a threat.
I'll tell you what you want to hear.
If I see you as the enemy, then we can never come together.
So long as I see you as the enemy, you'll win. If I don't try to understand you, my life will be a lot easier.
You will be able to understand me.
But I'm a stubborn person.
If I don't try to understand you,
Then I take away your humanity.
If I don't try to understand you,
I lose a piece of myself.
what happens when I look in your eyes? You'll be able to feel some of our pain. You will see that I take great pride in my culture.
When you look into my eyes, you see struggle.
A person who's really complex and misunderstood.
You see strength. You see courage. You see fear.
You'll see a quiet girl wanting to know the reason for your hatred.
What happens when I actually listen?
Then we can have a conversation. You might fall in love.
I might learn something.
You will understand the reason for me being here.
When you actually listen to me,
You will hear me as a person and not just the group I represent.
You will learn that I'm still trying to make sense of it all.
What happens when we actually have a conversation?
we will build bridges.
We now establish trust.
When we actually have a conversation,
We can achieve a common ground.
I try to find the ways that you got to where you are.
My world opens up.
When we have a conversation, we can learn that different doesn't have to be a bad thing. What happens when we have a conversation?
What happens when you have a conversation?
What happens when we have a conversation?
Then we can get ice cream.
My world of conversation experience has been mind-blowing, life-changing. I found where I belong.
My world and conversation experience has been out of this world.
My world and conversation experience has been life-changing and will stay with me forever.
I found a family that I didn't think was possible here at Penn State.
Wow.
That's cannot be my answer. It has been been a reason to keep going.
So,
Writing's not that
oh,
easy,
hello,
but
stop,
Grammarly
stop,
can
stop.
help.
Got it.
This and
Okay, there we go. So that is just a brief kind of idea of what it looks like to engage in conversation with others that don't look like us, don't have the same lived experiences as us. So what we're going to talk about is what addressing some of those complex issues look like. And as you can tell from this, what I kind of think this looks like a flower. I don't know about anybody else, but there surrounding these is what I like to say are complex issues. So with that, within any of these complex issues, and there's a number of important things to think about. So taken together, it can lead to some amazing kind of decision making. So if you take a look, for example, financial viability. Do we have the finances to do this? Can we afford to do a dialogue, for example? Is something, we're thinking about this community change, for example. Scientifically compatible, does it align with science? So as you're thinking about cooperative extension, there's a lot of things that you all have that are backed by science. Does it align with that? Is it technically feasible, for example? Does the technology exist to complete an option? Do we know how to do that, for example? That's one of the things I was thinking about 2020 before. Did we really know how to operate Zoom? Did we really know, like, that was a thing, right? So those are things that now would be something that we want to think about moving forward. We're probably all Zoom experts, right? Exactly. Okay. So is it also environmentally reasonable? Does this option care for the natural resources that we're going to sustain us over time? If not, is it something that we need to be thinking about? And then also, obviously this is really key here, is culturally inclusive. Does this option consider the different cultural perspectives that we're wanting to be impacted? So that's something that's really important in this. And if you notice, at the center of our awesome little flower there is the dialogue's purpose. And so if we were to ignore any of the outside elements, then we're obviously putting this purpose and this process at risk. But if we're thoughtful in considering all of these aspects, then it is going to be much more successful. The dialogue is going to be much more possible in its what you're wanting to achieve, and then change can be effective. So that's something that can be thought through as you're kind of thinking about the idea that you're wanting to kind of think through. Okay, so what we have here is kind of talking a little bit about the difference of debate versus dialogue. So when you think about debate, the first thing that typically comes to most people's mind is something like a presidential debate, which is something we obviously recently have seen. We may not have been all that impressed with it, but we at least saw one, so we'll just leave it at that. So we're going to talk about some conventional and some understanding processes. So for example, on the debate side of this, which is what we're looking on the conventional process, typically there's always one right answer. What you're going to see is that you're trying to aim for being the one who's right. The goal is to win a debate. You're thinking about how can I go ahead and persuade this person to my side of the issue, right? That is not what that's not what we're doing in a dialogue. You're also thinking about what is wrong with this picture. Why is this? Why do they think this way? Why are they not on my side? Then you're also thinking and listening to them very judgmentally, because what you're doing is you're listening for all the different flaws and errors so that you can also plan for your rebuttal. That's the debate, okay? The difference with dialogue, though, is that there are multiple perspectives and all of them are valid. The goal is to understand everyone's perspectives. Oops, that didn't, okay, sorry about that. Okay, gotta love the mouse. There we go. So, and then continuing on, you're going to notice that everyone should be curious and open in the space, which is kind of how we opened today's lesson. And then you're also going to say, what can I learn from this process? And you're listening for other people's stories in a dialogue. The other key to this, though, is that you're listening more than you're talking in a dialogue. And you're reflecting instead of actually reacting in a dialogue, which is very different than that of an actual debate. So, for example, the goal of the debate, as I mentioned, is you're asking yourself, am I actually winning this argument? Am I winning the debate, right? The goal of the dialogue, though, is, am I coming to know and understand the other person, the other perspective? So that's what we have. That's the difference between debate and dialogue. So the other thing about dialogues is that you're listening to learn and understand. So that is something that is really valid here. The biggest thing that we typically do, and I always remember, you know, when I was young, you always hear, are you hearing me? You know, I'm sure somebody, so, may or may not have looked at, okay, sorry about that. So, but, yes, my mother is in the room. So, here's the thing. So, but again, I'm sure we've all heard something along that lines. Are you hearing me? This is very different. You're listening and to learn from them and to understand them. It's not about hearing them. That's the difference. And so for a dialogue to be supported within this space, you're listening to their stories, you're hearing what their lived experience is. You're also, you're kind of believing their realities. You are not just hearing them in the moment, but you're taking in and you're becoming, you're not, let me rephrase that. You're not becoming defensive. You're not in a place of denial. You're receiving what they have because that's their experience. It does not have to be your experience, but you are listening for what they're telling you. The other thing is, what can you learn about yourself when they're sharing that story with you? And then again, like I mentioned on the other slide, is that you're listening more than you are talking, which I have to say is a very learned skill for me. As my mother's laughing in the background, yes, I tend to talk a lot, which I may or may not have learned from her. So it is something that is, for a lot of us, something you kind of have to restrain yourself for, because our thing is to just speak and respond. That's not what a dialogue is. You want to hear them, you want to take in that feeling and emotion that they're expressing in that story or that lived experience. So the other part to that is you want to reflect on what they're sharing with you and then be able to intentionally reflect and kind of react in with self-awareness. So a lot of what you all shared in the beginning is being self-aware that some of your communities were not similar in allowing you to really get out there and have those conversations because they're not diverse. That's being self-aware. So if you have to take and find a different space to do that, that is what this is talking about. So there are two types of listening, one of which is active listening, which I kind of touched on a little bit. This is, I'm going to give you an example here in just a second. This is where we're not utilizing judgment. We are just there to restate what has been said. But empathetic listening is more about really in putting yourself in the person's space. And so, for example, empathetic is what was the actual message that was said or stated, And then you're putting your place in the actual speaker's place. And so you're really understanding the depth of what is said and what is being shared with you. Active listening, for example, is, and I'm going to give this a childhood example. So I'm sharing a story with you, and I have said that I, as a child, loved to go to the ice cream parlor with my father and get my favorite kind of ice cream, which is vanilla with chocolate sauce. Most people because the last word I said was chocolate, okay, chocolate sauce, okay? Most people are going to hear, because they're hearing, they're not listening, they're going to say, oh, cool, she likes chocolate ice cream. So when it comes time for them to be like, oh, you know what, I was going to do something really nice for her, they're going to bring me some chocolate ice cream. So unfortunately, what happens with that is I absolutely hate chocolate ice cream. Can't stand chocolate ice cream at all. In fact, at this point in my life, I actually can't even have anything chocolate anyway. But what is important in a dialogue is to say, I've just stated my story to you. I've shared that I loved this experience with my father. My favorite ice cream is vanilla with chocolate sauce. The next part of a dialogue would be to say, what I'm hearing you say is that you like vanilla ice cream with chocolate sauce. Is that correct? Am I understanding you correctly? That's the key. You're restating so that you can actively hear what they said. So the question is, what I understand you to say is blank. Now, that allows the speaker to respond to you and make sure that they've clarified whether or not you have actually understood what they were sharing with you or not. That's the difference in active listening. So now we're going to talk about the power of being heard and the power of hearing. So people are more likely to act or to move toward change after they've emotionally connected with someone else's story. So, for example, my ice cream story, they may have connected with my story by wanting to bring me ice cream. The important part of that, though, is they need to bring me what I stated by actively listening for the vanilla part of the ice cream, not the chocolate part of the ice cream, okay? So one of the more interesting things about dialogues, and its common feature in the programs, is that it's an opportunity for members from all different diverse backgrounds to share in the group their various stories and lives with members from other groups. So for example, we talked about this not being a very diverse group, for example. You all can still share in this group because you all don't have the same lived experiences. You all are not from the same areas. You didn't probably grow up with the same maybe parental makeup, probably some of the same socioeconomic status. There's a lot of diversity in this space just because there's maybe not the same race and ethnicity diversity here. That's not to say that this is not a diverse group, okay? So just kind of be thinking about that. Now, we are going to kind of touch on, and this is a little thought-provoking in the sense there was a study from MIT, some neuroscientists who are way smarter than me, who showed the benefits of an exchange that's kind of much greater when members of a less empowered group share their stories with a traditionally dominant group, and then when the actual reverse happens. And so, for example, if they're given the opportunity to share, so those who are in the, let me rephrase that. So let me just read this actually. The one thing that is, most of our studies have shown, and more previous studies have shown and documented that the benefits of what we call perspective taking is that making an effort to understand another person's experience and point of view. However, this particular study that I mentioned, the MIT study, was by Emile Bruneau, and she dubbed that perspective giving is the opportunity for someone to share their own story with someone else. And so this is what I'm talking about. If someone in the group is able to give their perspective versus taking perspective is different. So let's take a look at that. So perspective taking and perspective giving. Perspective taking makes an effort to understand another person's perspective or point of view. But the difference is with perspective giving, you're embracing the opportunity to share your own story with someone else. So it's a little bit of the flip side to that. It's really key that in a dialogue that you're opening up in that shared space and allowing for everyone to do that. No matter whether or not they're part of that majority or dominant group or part of the less traditionally less empowered group. So as we kind of lead into the format for dialogues, there's some principal keys here and engagement for everyone, so that I want to kind of lay the groundwork. And so what you'll see on this slide is something that we kind of want to remember when you're talking about a dialogue format, is that you're going to want to include everyone, not just those individuals that you may know, but you're wanting to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table, that you're embracing diversity of all kinds, you're practicing equity throughout the process. And remember that equity and equality are not the same thing. And so one thing with equality is that, and that's a whole nother conversation that I could have. So anyway, we'll focus on, okay, so anyway, we'll keep going. But just remember that equity and equality are not the same thing. That you're wanting to share knowledge and resources, especially in the power and decision-making process. You're definitely going to want to connect dialogue and deliberation. And that is part of something that we'll kind of talk about here as we get into the actual program itself. And then you want to connect the dialogue with the actual social, political, policy change piece that's at the end of the phase of dialogue. So as you see on this next maybe slide, gotta love technology. There we go. Okay, so this is our framework that we call the dialogue to change process. And this is something that we have been using for several years. This is from the Everyday Democracy team, and they have formulated this. If you'll notice, there are 3 phases. The first one is the organize phase. The second is dialogue phase, and the last is the action phase. Within the organization phase, what you're looking at is your kind of building the coalition. So this is going to be about building who you want to be part of the dialogue, the team that's going to be doing this. Then you're looking at organizing and training. So this would be kind of the boots on the ground kind of a thing. Who's going to be, kind of planning. That's what this phase is about. Then you're going to look to kind of recruiting both participants and facilitators. This takes whether you're, let's say that you're going out into the community, maybe I'm staring at a school playground right now. So we'll say you're trying to do something within the community around the school. So you're going to want to make sure that you've marketed to, the parents and the teachers, and because they're within the community, you're going to want to maybe look at the neighbors, making sure that you've spread the word within that particular piece of the community. And then also you're going to need to do facilitator training. Typically facilitator training can differ in length, kind of depends on what you're trying to do, but facilitators typically train for a minimum of 5 to 8 hours so that they are well prepared to sit in a dialogue process and are able, you're going to usually have 2 facilitators per group. Groups typically in size between 6 and 10 people. You really don't want much of a larger group than 10 in a dialogue. The reason for that is because you want everyone to be able to speak. If you get larger than that, You tend to lose people's voices. Not everyone feels comfortable to share in a larger group than about 10. In the middle of this, you'll notice that there's a little red thing that says kickoff. You'll usually have some sort of event, some sort of public event that will kind of get everyone together that's a part of it, whether that's the organizers and the planners, the facilitators, the participants. So everyone's on the same page, everyone knows what's happening, maybe has a schedule, allows them to know the dates and times, that kind of thing is typically what you involve in a kickoff. Then you have the dialogue phase, and this is this lovely little diamond there in the middle. For example, Dialogues for Change, which is my program in OSU, a program I'm a part of, is that we typically will utilize the summer months and early fall to do the first organization or phase of the process. Then typically our dialogue phase will take place in either late fall or early spring. The reason for that is because of the OSU schedule. I don't know if anybody noticed, but OSU plays a lot of football. And so unfortunately we don't want to do anything that revolves around homecoming or anything else, because no one has anything like that on their calendar that would ever want to impede with homecoming or football. So we're mindful of that, and so we kind of make our schedule a little bit different so that we can ensure that everyone is able to participate, because our dialogues are open to faculty, staff, and students and administrators. And so when we get to the dialogue phase, we typically have anywhere from 6 to 8 dialogues running at a time. And so one of them might meet Mondays at 6, another might meet on Tuesdays over the lunch hour. So that's just for flexibility purposes, to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate. And typically they run 5 days a week. And then you have, and they will typically run for once a week for 2 hours, and they will then go for somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. On average, about 5 weeks. And so that's what's happening in the dialogue phase. In the action phase, right before we hit that, there's this other red, amazing little circle that says Action Forum. The Action Forum is actually, again, another culmination. All of those teams that were meeting during the dialogues have had a chance to come together and decide what they want to do as their action item. And everyone is presenting at that Action Forum. Now, no one knows what the other groups are doing. So they're all working independently. They come together. This is their opportunity to present at that. And what happens is they find that many of them might have very similar ideas. And what happens is we then will collaborate them together if need be. And then they will be able to move into the action phase. And we will help support them moving forward with moving to the action to change piece. And so whether or not that's working in teams, whether that's for policy changing on campus, working within the community to change something, maybe recruitment policies for OSU staff, for example. I'm making that up. But there's different things that can be happening. And on the community side, as I mentioned, for example, the school may also want to see speed bumps around the school in and out of the neighborhoods, because they have such traffic generated, and they want to protect the students' safety as well. So maybe that's something that they're considering. They're going to want to talk to policymakers and community agents. So that might be something that people would be talking to about in the community, just as an example. But you also notice across the bottom, there is the last part, which is the very kind of racial and intergenerational kind of equity lens. That's one thing that's really great about our dialogue piece, is that it doesn't matter whether or not whether they come from any race or ethnicity or racial background and or age, generation. It's already formulated in this actual diagram. So that's already something that we're taking into consideration. And so that's the way that we formulate our dialogue programs. So this is a list, a more thorough list of activities by session. As I mentioned, each dialogue meets from anywhere from 4 to 6, over a course of 4 to 6 weeks. They would have these sessions, and this is actually an example of a 6-week session or dialogue program. And you'll notice in, like, for example, session 1, they're going to be making connections. This is where you learn about one another. You're kind of building on learning about each other's backgrounds. That kind of thing is what's happening in the first one. In session 2, you're going to be focusing more on learning about certain case studies, learning about individual lived experiences, and understanding particular key words in regards to race and racism, and that are key to moving forward and learning each other's shared experiences. Session 3 is obviously about moving forward and opportunities for change and various challenges that people face, and also looking at inequities that are in our country and in our communities. Session 4 typically focuses on viewpoints. Why do those inequities exist? And we also typically will include a community fact sheet that is maybe some statistical information that might be relevant to the existing community that they find themselves in. Session 5 is more about creating a community report card. This is actually a report card, which is really interesting. You're going to take a look at things that are relevant to your community area. Say, education again, for example. Is it equitable to all racial diversities, for example, or racial and those various diverse backgrounds? You're going to notice and say, okay, well, I don't know if this particular school is really reaching the needs of everyone, so you may only give them a B or a C, for example. But then you say, well, for accessibility, they're really reaching the needs of those who are differently abled, so you may give them an A, for example. Those are things that you're actually going to, and I'm spitballing because I'm actually not really sure what this particular session might look like, but that's just some examples. Then you might also say, not sure that they're hiring some of the most diverse teachers. Maybe they need to really focus on hiring a more diverse teacher pool, or maybe really broaden what they're looking at. So you may score them very differently in their hiring practices, for example. Okay?
I was just wondering, from the example you gave at the school, and you said it's teachers, students, faculty, are those intermixed, so you would have teachers, students, and faculty in each of these groups, or is it all, this is a teachers group, this is a faculty group?
So that's an excellent question. We've done both. So in the past, we've had environments or dialogue groups that have included both faculty, staff, and students. And then we also have done it separately, where we've done maybe more of an administrator group, a faculty group, and a student group. There's 2 reasons and 2 perspectives on that reasoning. It kind of depends on the individual who's participating and their desire. We tend to lead more towards separating people out, and this also depends on what your desire is to get from your dialogues. So for the reason for OSU specific race and racial equity, we found that typically we remove people or keep them in their particular classification. So for example, we do students and or we do faculty and staff, and then we do administrators. We tend to get more honest feedback and more participation from those who are in their own like group. The reason for that is, let's say we have an administrator in with some students. Typically a student may feel less likely to share about a negative experience that they've had that may be racially charged if there's an administrator in the room. And also vice versa. An administrator may not want to share about some racial experiences or lack of knowledge, or maybe something that they've experienced in their own personal life in front of a student. and because that is a very vulnerable place to find yourself in. And so you have to be very mindful of that. So when you're creating your dialogue groups, that is something that your organizers will need to help assist you with. And that's what the CTRU is for. The organizers would help you facilitate that. And that kind of depends on the goal of the dialogue itself. Are you trying to focus solely on relations? Are you wanting to learn from one another? Because sometimes you can have separate groups, for example, where you would have what we call affinity groups, or you could also then have, and then you might also have an affinity group, which might be what would typically be one all-white group, for example, or predominantly white group, and then you might also have a person of color group, and then you would come back together as you learned from each other. We've also done them as a mixed group as well. So that kind of depends on the goal of what the CTRU is wanting to do and how you're wanting to learn. In my understanding of this, I would suspect that they would be more diverse groups, and I think that's for the purpose of talking across those areas of difference and learning from each other's shared experiences.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I do have one thing I want to show you, just because it is kind of relevant for the question that was just asked. And this is something that is from another program that we use, also, or not another program, but another piece of information that we use. And this is Facing Racism in a Diverse Nation. And I'm more than happy to share this with you. But this is from Everyday Democracy. I'm pretty sure it's just everydaydemocracy.com. .org. But this is a actual dialogue guide that we would use. And it is open to anyone. It's on their website. It has several, it's basically the format of the dialogue guide that we would typically use. Myself, Tammy, Dr. Stout, and I are all trained facilitators and trained partners with Everyday Democracy. So we also have the capabilities of writing our own dialogue guides. So if there's ever a situation where we find ourselves being able to, wanting to change topics or areas of focus, we're able to write these on our own. But this is already created, so we don't actually have to change anything from it. And so, if I get my little mouse to work. So this is just kind of some general information about Everyday Democracy and the guide itself. But I kind of wanted to just kind of show you how it opens itself up and lends itself, I'll get through all the intro stuff here, to the way the dialogues work. And this is kind of an example of the program, outcomes that people focus on. But this again leans into the organizing phase, the dialogues, all of that. This is example of session 1, what you would do. It's already lined out for you in the sense that it has facilitator notes in it that you could utilize, and then what you do as far as introductions, particular questions that you're going to ask. It gives you the time limits of what you should allow for each particular section. And then some just general information. Again, these are the little facilitator notes here. And then the closing questions that you'll want to end each session with. And then how to prepare for the next session as well. So these are already formulated for you. Again, these are on the Everyday Democracy website. So that's just kind of a great resource that we utilize. Again, I'll give you that information as we kind of finish. So that takes us to, again, my partnership with the Center for, and this partnership as well for the Center for Public Life, which ultimately is who is why we're here today. So their basic goal and mission is to partner with communities to address public problems using research-based, community-centered approaches to build a more equitable and vibrant democratic society. The one thing that's really interesting about this, that as a nonpartisan entity, they're available to assist you with like government, policy, organizers, all of that kind of thing, without having to have some of that extra, piece in the community or stake in the community that some people that you might work with might already have seated in the community. So those are things that are really nice about the Center for Public Life. And obviously, they've already kind of established the collaboration with the extension services, already with Langston University, for example, pretty sure the College of Muskogee Nation, and then obviously the Coming Together for Racial Understanding. So that relationship already exists, and it's something to take advantage of and utilize their services, which is why Dr. Mike Stout has put, oh, okay, that's going the wrong way. Sorry about that. So this is just kind of a brief overview of what the center does within the community as far as working to frame and do different things as far as assisting and partnering with community members. They can do all of the research behind the scenes, increasing the capacity for effectiveness to problem solve. This is kind of one of the reasons why I partner with them as well, to kind of give me the stake in the foundation that our program needs at OSU Stillwater. And then also just another things that they can, ways that they can kind of continue to provide resources to you. This allows them to do, they've already got the facilitator training that they can do for you, the organizing and assisting with the community dialogues and the action phase, and really kind of train the facilitators. They've already got the guides to help you with that as well. Those partnerships obviously already exist, so that kind of allows for a further and broader scope that you can be more effective with. And so with that, so if you have any questions about the Coming Together for Racial Understanding, or to learn more about how the center can help you, I encourage you to reach out to Dr. Mike Stout. His email is included, as well as his phone number, and or myself. I'm more than happy to do my best to assist you, but I thank you for this opportunity, and I'm more than happy to answer any other questions outside of this amazing presentation. And thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. That's all I have for you.
Thank you so much.